Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today we're painting Summers from Earthbound. This is the full version. If you're interested in the time-lapse, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. Since I moved to the beach, Summers has been the town I kind of identify with most. We have a beach, obviously, expensive shops. It's a tourist town, so lots of people are here on the beach. And it kind of reminds me of Summers when I'm at the beach. So I sketched out kind of the view from the beach, looking outwards towards the ocean. And to make it more like Earthbound, I sketched in a small Kraken on the horizon. And how you get to Summers in game is you use the Skyrunner, but it crash lands on the beach and kind of like blows up into a million pieces. And if I didn't draw it whole and drew it in pieces, you wouldn't recognize it. So I just kind of made it look crash landed, and I covered it in a little bit of sand, just so it's still there and recognizable as the Skyrunner. But the first thing I want to do is start to paint in my sky. I'm going to figure out where I want my horizon line to be on the canvas, draw myself a line, and then start to fill it in blue. The blue I'm using is cyan with a little bit of titanium white to make it lighter. Now, not only am I going to paint this blue, but I also have some more titanium white on my palette to do the clouds as I'm doing the sky. That way I'm doing wet and wet paint, and they're going to blend together just a little bit. To make a perfect horizon line, I took my T-square and made little tiny marks every about 6.5 inches down, and then I used the frog tape just to tape and make sure I was right at each of those marks across the painting. That way my horizon line is perfectly straight, it's perfectly level, and then after I paint it I can take the tape and peel it off and keep that nice straight line. The next thing I want to paint is the ocean, and I have ultramarine blue, cyan, and titanium white on my palette, and I'm starting with the ultramarine blue along the horizon and working my way into the cyan and getting lighter and lighter as I get into the surf. This beach scene is going to be kind of similar to the Pokemon Go scene I did, just kind of in the way I'm using the waves and the textures that I'm using here. So I've mixed up a sand color, and I have a little bit of a darker color for where the sand is wet, and then I have a lighter color for where the sand is dry. And I'm going to start by using the drier color, which is kind of just a little bit of orange, and I toned it down with some blue and lightened it up with some white to make this kind of yellowy sand color. So this will be the base for it, and I'm going to kind of bring it across the entire part of the sand here and start to bring it up into the water a little bit because I did paint this too far down. Once I decide where that difference is between the water and the sand, I'm going to take some white and lay down a line of white between the two. I've taken my darker color and started to fill in where the wet sand is, and I don't have it all the way where it should be yet, so I'm just going to bring some more down to maybe about here. And I'm also going to make a hard edge between the white and the dark sand. So I'm just going to go across all of this part here and just make a hard edge instead of more of this blended edge. In addition to doing the wet sand, I'm also taking some burnt sienna and just doing a little bit on the edge because that foam is going to be a bit higher up and it'll cast a shadow onto the wet sand. And I'm also going to kind of feather out this white here into the blue to be more of the foam. And I'm also going to take some of the sand color and bring that in there too. For me, the hardest thing about doing the waves is how everything looks really messy until at some point it all kind of comes together and looks realistic. So the next thing I want to do is start to work on some of these faraway waves. And I'm going to be using some more of the ultramarine, some more of the cyan, just to bring in some far variations in shapes and colors back there. And I'm just going to do this with a smaller brush and just be kind of real careful and just to bring in a few darker areas and a few lighter areas, just to change it up so it's not a flat gradient back here. I'm also taking some phthalo green blue shade, and in the shadow of this big wave in the inner side of it, I'm just bringing a little bit of this in. I decided to change the color of the inside of that wave because the phthalo green really wasn't working, so I mixed up a green with cyan and yellow, and then lightened it up with some titanium white, and then I used just a little bit of ultramarine to make it just a little bit more blue, and I kind of came up with this color here, and I'm just adding it in along the top and then fading it down into the regular light cyan I have here. Next, I'm going back to some titanium white. In addition to kind of lightening up this foam in here, I'm also going to take a smaller brush and just add a little bit to the crest of this wave. The wave has really come together, and I think one of the things that really finalized it for me was doing some of these receding water waves that are kind of going back out to the ocean. So what I did with that is I did a little bit of a white glaze where I used the edge of that part, and I just kind of blended it from there and then back into the water. And I also took a little bit of white and did just a little touch of like foam or bubbles on the edges of those. And I also took a little bit more of that burnt sienna and just did a little bit of a shadow underneath them. But it's time to start moving on, and I sketched in the edge of the sand here that the Skyrunner is going to sit underneath, and this part over here is where the Skyrunner starts to go upwards. And then this is kind of the dividing line between the two. So I'm starting to sketch that in. I'll start to sketch in the edges of the chairs and the umbrella, and also the Kraken. There was something funky about how the Skyrunner was drawn, so I erased that, the chairs too, so I erased them, and then in my sketchbook I drew out the Skyrunner how I wanted it to be full size. I used this as my circle tracer because I kind of figured it would be a good size for it, and then I just sketched the whole thing into my sketchbook. And now I've gone and cut it out, so you kind of have to imagine how it was on the full paper. Here was the circle, and then I had started to draw in the ellipse for like the ring around it, and I had drawn in one of the feet and then the antenna up top, and I roughly sketched in kind of how I wanted the dune to be. And then I thought it looked kind of weird, like it wasn't buried deep enough, so then I cut them apart, and then I could kind of fill it in like this and decide how much should be covered, kind of where it should sit with the sand dune. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace the Skyrunner where I want it to go first, like how tall I want it to be on the canvas, and then I can take this dune and kind of line it up like where I want it to be and kind of figure it out this way, and then I can just sketch everything in from here. I'm I'm really happy with how things are starting to look. The chairs need a little bit of work. I think it's just too narrow and I need to make it a bit wider. But I want to start to block things in with a primary coat of white, just so all of my colors will stand out. But I'm going to be using it on a brush for these tiny areas just to make sure that I get them perfectly, and I might switch over to my paint marker to fill in some of the bigger areas. My base color for the Kraken is a blue-green that I've lightened with just a little bit of white because it was just too dark otherwise. And then once that base layer dries, I can do a second coat with some value, and then I can add some details like filling in the teeth, the blood along the bottom of the mouth, the fins on the back part of the tail, and then kind of like the fins that come off the back of the head. I finished off the Kraken by adding a little bit of a wave along the bottom of his body, and then taking some of the ultramarine blue to add a little bit of a shadow there in the water. Next I'm going to jump up here to the umbrella and do a base layer of cyan for the blue parts and titanium white for the white parts. While I'm blocking in colors, I just thought I would also block in the Skyrunner with a neutral gray. I'm moving on to doing the value for the Skyrunner next, and I think this gray is just too brown for some reason, and while it does kind of fit in with the sun and the sand, it doesn't really work for something that's kind of like technology or space. To me it should be a bit more of a cool gray, so I've mixed up a carbon black and a titanium white on my palette to make a new gray, and I'm going to kind of just go over it with that as a base. I'll be using titanium white for a highlight and more carbon black for a shadow underneath the windows and underneath this ring. I painted the antenna bent just because it was a crash landing, and for the windows, because they're glass, I feel like they should be broken or at least cracked a little bit, but I'm going to give them their base layer, which is a grayish blue, and then after that dries, I'm going to add a little bit of value to them because glass does have reflective qualities, and I'm also going to kind of just bring in a little bit of hairline cracks on them. The last thing I have to do for the Skyrunner is just put a little bit of a lip of metal around each of the windows. And just like I did the windows, I'm going to prime it in white first. I'm moving over to the umbrella sections next, and you can see it's really see-through using the cyan on top of the titanium white. So I'm starting by laying down another layer of the cyan to make it solid, and I'm going to be using the complement of orange to sort of bring in some shading with it. And I also might bring in a little bit of light blue around the edges. Because this is the underside of the umbrella, it's not going to be super bright, it's actually going to be kind of in shadow, so everything's going to be a little bit darker. I finished the base value for the umbrella and I thought it looked kind of flat, so in the areas that are white I started to sort of fill in these ripples in the fabric where the dark areas are, and it makes it look more alive, like the wind is actually catching it and creating some waves in the fabric. I'm going to be doing the same for the blue, but in the meantime you may notice my shirt is a little bit wet here. I had a paintbrush and I accidentally touched the side of my shirt over my shoulder with some paint, and it got on my shirt, and this is one of my favorite ones, my Last of Us shirt. So what I do is I immediately get it wet with some water, and I need to make sure it's clean, so I just use the water in my spray bottle here. And then I have this product called Kiss Off. I do have a Tide pen, but I find that that kind of like bleaches my clothes, so I don't use it as much. This is the thing I use all the time, and it's just kind of like a big tube of detergent, and I just kind of, after I get it wet, I just put a little bit on the shirt, get it a little bit more wet, and then I just blot it with a clean damp towel. And it works pretty good. I wash it out, you know, really soon with cold water to make sure it doesn't set in there, but I've saved a lot of my clothes that way. But like I said, I'm going to be doing some of these same ripples in the blue area, and then I can start to prime in the pole of the umbrella. If you've been watching Steven's vlog channel, you'll know that for a few days a long time ago, he and I both worked on the beach, setting up these umbrellas and chairs every day, well, the 2 days we did it. It was so hot out on the beach because it regularly gets into the upper 90s, and then it's super humid, and these are incredibly heavy because they're canvas and wood, and then you have to really bury them into the sand, and it's really windy out on the beach. It's a really difficult job, and not many people can do it. So I know firsthand how heavy these things are, and I'm trying to give this a nice wooden texture, but just like everything else, I want to prime it white first because it makes it a lot easier to do anything else on top. So I had some problems with the first go around painting this umbrella pole. Some of my paint leaked out and got underneath the tape, and I took off the tape and I noticed it was there and it was already dry, and I also thought the pole was too small, like to support all of this weight. So I retaped it up a bit wider, so I don't have to worry about any of this white showing. I'm just going to paint over the whole thing and cover it all up. And I'm also going to talk about some of the value and detail I'm doing with it, because I'm going to try and do it all in one go. I made sure the tape was really good, stuck to the canvas because I used my fingernail to kind of scratch at it and push it down. And I'm also going to try and work fast enough that I can take the tape off while the paint is still wet. That'll kind of help it give it a nice crisp line. But up here it's in the shadow underneath the umbrella canopy itself, and down here is more of the burnt sienna, the warmer brown, because the light's going to hit the sand and kind of bounce up a little bit and hit the pole. So it will be lighter down here and darker up here. I have the burnt umber, the burnt sienna on my palette, some titanium white, and carbon black. And you can kind of see a little bit of detail here that I tried to do on the first go around, but that's kind of the plan for this second time. The umbrella still needs some spokes, so I'm going to use the chalk pastel and a ruler and just draw some real straight lines across these parts where the colors change. And I'm also going to use my ruler and kind of pick a spot here and then just kind of go out and connect each one of those so I have the support spokes too. After the spokes are marked in white, I'm just going to paint them burnt umber to match the pole. I've redrawn in the chairs and I'm just priming them white like everything else I've been doing. But before I paint them a color, I'm going to go ahead and shade the sand underneath the umbrella. The umbrella is a circle viewed from above, but from our angle it's going to be an ellipse, and you only see like a fourth of it. So it's going to basically cast the same shape down upon the sand. And I've mixed up more of my darker colors. Basically I just still had some of this left, and I mixed in some burnt umber and sienna until I got it closer to these colors. And that's going to be that shadow color underneath the umbrella. So inside of this chalk line I have, I'm going to be using that dark color, just kind of laying it down on top of the sand, and I still have some of this color if I want to do some blending on the edges. The colors of the chairs are going to match the umbrella, and I still have these on my palette, so I'm just going to bring them down and do the chairs the same way I did the umbrella. And we're done! We have Summers from Earthbound. If you're interested in this piece, you could buy a phone case or a poster, or bid on this original canvas. There's links down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find out more at supportmal.com. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.